For today I have yet another build for Crusader, and this one I named Captain America mainly because of the sword. I really wanted to play with the Daigon Stormblade. That's the only field boss SNS that we have right now. It's really sad that it's so underrated and people don't really want to play with it because of, I don't know, probably the stats and maybe even the passive. I would assume it doesn't look that appealing to a lot of people, but I really wanted to try it out. If you look at this passive, the damage of Wielding Shield is increased by 25% and it can deflect. Well, it's a funny translation. It doesn't really deflect. It's bouncing from one target to another. And usually that was 4 times on the regular skill. Now it's increased to 7 times and it can hit the same target multiple times. And you must have enemies around the target. So you must have at least one more enemy to be able to just bounce between both of them, which I would assume before that was not able. And you'd have to actually have 4 enemies to actually hit them 4 times. But now you can have just 2 enemies. It will just hit those 2 enemies respectively 3 and 4 times for a total of 7, which is looking pretty cool. Surprisingly enough, it's still pretty cheap, which kind of suggests that people don't really want to play with this sword. Right now it's going for about 600, that's the cheapest version obviously, and they can go higher as well. I managed to get it even cheaper for around 500, so that was pretty good. And now it's getting a bit more expensive. Once again, this build is mostly focused for Nebula. At the same time, efficient at PvE, you'll be able to clear up the enemies relatively fast. And if you've already been there, you know that the enemies are relatively tough. They're pretty much on the same level or even stronger than Abyssal Dungeon enemies. You want to have somewhat efficient build for that, but at the same time be ready for PvP action at any given time. Here you see some numbers, which obviously ideally you want to have slightly different numbers. This is because I simply have some of the items being more of a PvE oriented type of items. I just don't have that freedom to get every single PvP item that I really want. So there's some compromises with the build. As you can see, the hit chance is not that high. And you can see some other things, but I'll show you the build on Questlog and you'll see that the numbers are slightly different, which are more like the ideal type of stats that you're gonna have. But relatively speaking, the items are almost the same. So looking at the masteries first, as you can see, I'm using actually the same PvP setup. One of the reasons here is that you actually have just 3 slots per weapon combination, regardless of your gear. That's the maximum slots right now, and you can't really buy any more to actually experiment more. So it's going to be really annoying to just constantly change masteries all the time. And for me personally, I need to have 1 for tank PV, which would be completely different compared to the DPS for just regular grinding. And then you also have the Nebula, the PvP build, which I again prioritize Nebula. But for somebody else, you may have just 1 particular build for tank, maybe have just extra slot, but either way, I'm just using this build right now. One thing I'm changing right here is I'm removing critical equilibrium for Blade Harvest. That's going to give us some more sustain. And generally speaking, you're not really going to be seeing a lot of crits on this build anyway. At the same time, critical damage resistance could be good if you drop below 50%. And this is not a very tanky build. Probably don't need on this one particularly, would be Steel Sacrifice, because we're actually not using Indomitable Armor on this build. Just don't have a spot. I had to make some choices, but you can still keep it like that anyway. But that's not going to negatively impact you if you're not using it anyway. Now, when it comes to artifacts, I'm using the full set of Greedseeker, which pretty much all of these stats here are pretty decent, in my opinion, to just be a bit more tanky in PvP. Now, you could use something that is more oriented to DPS, but again, the only thing we have here that is going to give us like extra DPS in this case would be Chaos Harbinger for extra critical chance and critical damage. But again, we're not relying on criticals that much. Now, you can always go back to the other option, which was the Ancestor Armor for extra HP, general more sustain. And you can also use the Vindictus Raid Blade, which is going to give you extra damage when you're under 40% of HP. But again, that's a bit more risky build. I would say that this, on theory, because I haven't used it yet, the Forsaken Zealot would be the best in my opinion. Not only because of a lot of defense that you're going to obtain from it, but also the actual effects, which will give you a lot of damage reduction for a given time. And also the other option, which I actually don't have, that's the reason I don't have it. I didn't equip it. The other one gives you additional stamina regeneration. And now jumping on Questlog to actually get a better representation of the stats and what you should be actually aiming. It's slightly different, as you can see. Mostly I changed the Eternal Flame Ring to Solitaire of Purity for extra hit chance. That's generally what we need. Unfortunately, we couldn't push to 70 perception right now with these particular items. The main reason would be the actual Daigon SNS. Melee hit chance is slightly higher. Again, on my actual built-in game, I don't have the best possible runes, and also these are full level 80 purple runes. Same thing applies for artifacts. I've put on the best things I have. Obviously, the ideal artifacts are going to be really difficult to obtain, even more RNG than runes, like I've said before. So these stats are going to be somewhat difficult to reach with this setup, but you can get somewhat close to that. So I'm going to go to the skills. Here's what we use. As usual, we're going to use the Shield Survival technique. We use Von and Brawl, Shield Strike, Gaia Crush, Strategic Rush, obviously Whirling Shield, that's the upgraded version, Da Vinci's Courage, Precision Dash, Stunning Blow, Guillotine Blade, Counter Barrier, Desperate Clash, and Devastating Smash. For passives, we use Resilient Mind, Aegis Shield, Spectrum of Agony, Impenetrable, Vital Force, Cold Warrior, Victor's Moral, and Moral Boost. There are quite a few differences between this one and the regular Nebula build that I was running. This one is obviously way squishier. You don't have that many shields and stuff like that. So you want to be trying to get in fights and get out. And because we're still on the heavier side, we still have heavy armor, so we have a lot of defensive stuff. We're not going to immediately die as melee, but we'll be able to do a bit more damage than the previous builds and also maintain some control of the field. The first two skills are pretty much the same as usual. Obviously with the Immortal Titanic, you always want to have Gaia Crush anyway. That's a lot of damage in smaller area, but still AoE damage. Since we're not using multiple chain collision, the only AoE collisions we have is Strategic Rush and Desperate Clash. Both will proc Moral Boost. And since we already have some cooldown reduction because of Daigon Stormblade, with this is going to be even more cooldown reduction, which is pretty good. Whirling Shield, of course, this is the main thing of the build. This is actually can do pretty decent damage. Before that was relatively low because you can't really do much. There's the dependency that you actually need to have multiple targets. And once again, because it's Nebula Island, you're going to have very often a lot of targets around you, not just PvP, but also PvE. So you'll most likely be able to use that to its highest efficiency all the time. Da Vinci's Courage is questionable thing. It's a little bit of a support. Change for something else. Maybe use Towered Bastion with the spec that gives you skill damage boost instead of damage reduction if you want. Or you could change to something completely different like Wheel Breaker, which will debuff the enemies, so you'll be doing more damage. Either way, you can use some of these other ones. I just feel like Da Vinci's Courage is one of the best for me because of the extra attack speed. But again, you can use other things as well. Precision Dash is the only greatsword mobility skill that we have. Will allow us to proc the mastery that gives us lifesteal after we use greatsword mobility skill. So keep that in mind. That's the only one we have. And you're probably going to be using that almost all the time in PvP anyway. You see we have Stunning Blow here, which is a single target stun. It's pretty good stun, very fast casting time. It feels like almost instant anyway. This will lead to Guillotine Blade. And because of this set, you have huge value of Guillotine Blade. Because of the Oblivion Rat set, we naturally have very high heavy attack chance. And also not only that, but both Precision Dash and Whirling Shield also buff your heavy attack chance, compared to usually you would have a bit less. All of these things together combined with actual Stunning Blow or could be Devastating Smash. Either way, they're both stuns. Keep in mind, you can also stun if you push enemies with Strategic Rush to the wall, which will then lead to Cold Warrior passive that will increase our heavy attack chance versus shocked or stunned targets. So just generally speaking, that's going to give us a lot of heavy attack chance if you properly buff it, which will then lead to Guillotine Blade. If you actually do a heavy attack with it, it's going to become an AoE. It's going to damage the enemies around the main target for also pretty high damage. With the specs, we use Cruel Smite and Water Barrel, so that's even more AoE. Shield Strike will become Piercing Strike for just more AoE. Gaia Crush, once again, because of Immortal Titanic, we don't use Frost Cleaving, so just attack speed and critical hit chance increase. Strategic Rush doesn't have anything. Shield Throw would be the Whirling Shield, obviously, because if you don't change that, it's only going to be a shield that you're going to be throwing in the front. It's not going to actually activate the passive, so you need to have Whirling Shield. Da Vinci's Courage will go for duration increase and instant healing. Of course, some of those things are optional. You can play around with those, but that's just what I put here. Precision Dash, almost always you want to get the bind. Then you have Stunning Blow, which would get damage increase for the next skill that's used, hit chance increase, and effect duration increase, which Guillotine Blade obviously get the AoE spec and also charge damage. Counter Barrier will get cooldown and damage increase. And Fierce Clash gets everything basically. You're gonna get Desperate Clash, damage increase, and chance increase. That's the collision chance. So almost always gonna be doing that. Damage increase is always just good. And why we use the spec Desperate Clash instead of the regular one, which is just Fierce Clash. So Fierce Clash is basically pushing the enemy, and you can collide others with the main target, And also, if you push them to a wall, you're going to stun them. However, the reason we use Desperate Clash is because it's not pushing them, it's actually knocking them down. It's applying collision prone, so that's like a knockdown. And also, other enemies around the target will also have chance to push. That's additional collision. So it's much easier to actually apply those collisions. And the first target is not going to run away, just like with the Strategic Rush that you're going to push them. With Strategic Rush, you're also pushing yourself with the target, so you're still going to be there. If you use Fierce Clash, the problem is you push the enemy away from you. So that's only usable against the wall. With the spec Desperate Clash, however, you're knocking them on the ground, which is way better in my opinion. And then Devastating Smash will get effect duration increase. In the end, we can look at the stats right here just to get some idea of what you can achieve with this setup. Keep in mind, we're still running not maxed out masteries. You can see 120, 130, that's around the range I am right now. Once again, the artifacts are in the best possible situation. It's going to take some time to get them. Runes are also a bit of RNG, but I'd personally say you're going to get the runes much faster than the actual artifacts. It's just a bit of grind. And this build still doesn't have trait resonance, so that's going to be in the future to just further amplify that build. Let's look at the stats. So we have collision chance just slightly above 1000, which for most of the targets should be fine unless it's somebody that's actually tank and is trying to stack over that anyway. On the other hand, as a tank, we also have high collision resistance. You can play around with this, but personally I got it to above that collision chance. So generally speaking, this is in this range because perception is below 70. So obviously we have lower chances to apply a crowd control, lower hit chance, but also all of that procs perception balance, which in this case, because we're below 70, is going to give us extra resistances instead of hit chance. The one thing you can do to play around this, if you feel like there's some problems, you can look at these particular items. You see I don't put synergies on the belt and the bracelet because they don't actually give you stat points. And the other things, personally, I don't find them that useful for this build. You have triple support runes on both of them. One is with collision resistance, the other one is with skill damage resistance. So you can easily play around with these and adjust accordingly if you feel like you need to, just to min-max the actual result. If you feel like you're getting pushed a bit more, you can just replace all of these with collision resistance, which is going to get you to around above 1400 collision resistance, which is pretty high in my opinion. The only people that will reach about 1500 collision chance are either going to be specifically designed anti-collision builds, again as a tank obviously, which on the other hand we have pretty low DPS, so that really depends on the builds, and you're not going to find that many people running something like that, or people that already have archboss weapons and nebula accessories, which will just ramp up their stats a bit higher. But once again, there are not going to be many people that are actually in this situation, so personally I feel like this is a decent spot. And this is the trade-off, of course. You can just increase that resistance versus the skill damage resistance, or you can also play around and actually add stun resistance instead. You got about 100 skill damage resistance points on these three runes. However, the crowd control resistance goes for a little bit higher. You can see there 56 points per rune at level 80. So it's going to be over 160 crowd control resistance points. So if you replace these three with stun resistance, you see now we have slightly lower skill damage resistance, which is still okay, not too bad. However, the stun resistance over 1000. So again, the only people that will be able to stun you as well will have to play around, just add a lot of stun chance on their gear to actually break through that. So that is pretty good. The hit chance is not very high. It's actually lower in game for me. Keep that in mind, but it's still in a good range, over 2000. There was some statement that you can reach like 3000. Sure, you can reach 3000, just like you can ramp up a lot of other things by sacrificing a lot of synergies and just focusing on one or two particular stats, which personally, in my opinion, will allow you to maybe counter very specific classes. But overall, the biggest part of the content would be mass PvP. You're going to suffer from a lot of the other stats, so you're not going to have a very balanced build in this situation. Yeah, almost everything you can just push to the limit and just have that play around some particular stat, but overall that's not going to be very balanced. And I'm always trying to make balanced builds that can work in different situations on the fly, because you're going to have different situations. You're going to actually experience different situations. You can go for one particular stat only if you're doing dueling, for instance, which is pretty much just for fun. If you create a dueling build, then sure, you can just go crazy with some specific stat and you're going to count on one particular build or one particular weapon combination. But generally speaking, for the majority of the content, you want to have something balanced. And this is what I'm aiming for right here. Stun chance is relatively low, so we can't really rely on that too much. Max HP is not that high. This is kind of a base HP for a tank. Anything lower than that, then Probably you can't even call yourself a tank, to be honest. But you can, of course, yeah, adjust that a little bit if you want. As you can see, with this build, we managed to actually push 2 okay stats for heavy attacks and critical hit chance. Heavy attack will be ramped up more while you play because of the active skills. Critical hit chance, not so much. The endurances are somewhat in a balanced state. You have about 1000 on magic and melee, and ranged is about 1400. Heavy attack evasion, I only pushed magic further because now it seems like magic weapons are becoming more powerful than before, so you may want to prioritize trying to counter them. And magic endurance is somewhat difficult to obtain, so I've just pushed a little bit from runes, but generally speaking, that's not going to be that easy to get there. Skill damage boost is not very high, it's much lower simply because we're using different weapon, but still in a good range. And so that's how it would look in the best possible situation. Of course, you can adjust some of the items, but not too much so that you keep the same philosophy of the builds. So that's gonna be for this video, guys. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and see you next time.